For me, I think the big event of 2026 will be this April when Trump visits China on a state visit, his first and his second term. And the U.S.-China relationship, Russia, the war in Ukraine, it's basically pretty settled. It's stabilized. What will happen between Europe, NATO, Russia, we can basically forecast easily. But what's really up in the air is the US-China relationship. So what Trump wants to do is go to China and negotiate a grand bargain between China and the United States. Remember that in 1971, Nixon removed the US dollar from the gold standard. And so the US dollar was now free floating. So to stabilize the US dollar, to give it value, he did two things. The first is he established the petrodollar, meaning that Saudi Arabia would only allow for its oil to be purchased by US dollars. And the second thing that he did was he visited China to open up China. And so what America did in the 1980s was transfer technology and expertise to China, open its market so that China would become addicted to the US dollar. And for, a few decades, this relationship worked really well. But then the United States started to abuse its exorbitant privilege. It started to print too much US dollars. It started to engage in these wars in the Middle East that were causing the debt to balloon. Then you have the 2008, 2009 great financial crisis. So China became much more worried about the value, the stability of the US dollar. So then it began to try to internationalize the yuan. It created something called the Gold Corridor, the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So it's trying to recalibrate the financial market so it become much more stable. And China would have much more sovereignty in the global trade system. And this is now destabilizing the US dollar. So what Trump wants to do is to force China to continue to buy US dollars, because remember, if China were to dump all of its US treasuries, then there will be a sovereign debt crisis in the United States. So Trump needs to figure out how to liberalize the Chinese financial markets and to get Chinese to continue to buy more US dollars. And that's what we're seeing right now, right? So by invading Venezuela, what Trump hopes to do is force China to buy oil using US dollars. So where it's trying to get most of its oil, it gets most of its oil from the Middle East. So if Trump were to attack Iran and destabilize the Middle East, then China will be forced to rely more on the Western Hemisphere for its oil supply. But not just the oil supply, but also for silver, for gold, for lithium, for copper, basically all the minerals that China needs to power its EV industry, its AI industry. So this is the grand strategy that's being played out, where Trump is conducting all these wars around the world in order to strangle the Chinese economy so that China becomes reliant on the Western Hemisphere for its supply. And then China will be forced to buy more US dollars. And that's the great game that we are witnessing right now in 2026. The United States, if it were to perceive China as a peer and were to treat China with respect, to see China as a sovereign nation that is worthy of respect, and we would have no issues. China would be perfectly happy to trade as equals with the United States. The problem is that the United States is the global hegemon, and it insists on maintaining its global hegemony. So China must be a subordinate to the American empire. And China refuses to do that. China is a sovereign nation, and it wants to be respected on the world stage. But as you point out, these two nations are codependent on each other. If China were to lose access to oil in the Middle East and in the Western Hemisphere, it could depend on Russian oil, but Russia could not meet China's energy needs. China imports 3/4 of all its oils from overseas. 50% of its oil comes China imports 3/4 of all its oil needs. Half of those come from the Middle East, 20% come from Russia. If China tomorrow could import all its oil from Russia, it would do so. But Russia does not have the capacity to do that. You still have to build those pipelines, which will take years and years and cost tens of billions of dollars. And so China is sort of stuck right now. But as you point out, China does have a lot of tools It does have a lot of weapons. For example, it can continue to destabilize the US dollar. And we saw that with the silver markets, right? So what China did at the start of this year was announce that it would restrict exports of its silver. And China dominates the silver market. And this caused the price of silver to skyrocket in COMEX, the commodities exchange in the United States. And this destabilized the US financial markets. So what we're seeing is almost mutually assured destruction, right? So if the United States were to cut off China's oil, if the United States were to embargo China could just dump all its US treasuries, could just cause financial havoc, and both nations would be destroyed. So what we're seeing, and here's a metaphor, okay? Imagine a ladder over an abyss. And both China and the United States are trying to climb this ladder, and it would be their best interest to climb it together at the same time. The United States, for whatever reason, insists on being higher than China. Now, if the United States goes too far and leaves China far behind, the ladder destabilizes and they both fall into the abyss. If China overtakes the United States and climbs too far, they also both fall into the abyss. So this is a really dangerous and really stupid game they're both playing. That's not true. What America did was to spite China, because America's not going to go in and build up Venezuela's oil infrastructure. That'll cost tens of billions of dollars. It'll take many years before America can really bring the Venezuela oil industry up to modern standards. What it's doing is cutting off access to China. That's the entire goal, right? So it's not to claim the oil, and it's not to benefit U.S. oil companies. It's just to spite China. That's all it is. So the American economy has some major weaknesses, and you're right that it's possible that America faces a great financial crisis this year. So let's go over some of the major problem areas of the American economy. The first is artificial intelligence, where right now most American GDP is driven by investment in AI. So just building data centers, which consume a lot of water and electricity in local communities. And what's a problem is that these data centers cost tens of billions of dollars. And it's really unclear how these data centers will make money, because right now, how most people use AI is to generate videos and to cheat in school, right? To get ChatGPT to write their essays. It's unclear how this will be beneficial to the economy. And if it's possible for AI to be profitable, this will cause millions of jobs to be lost. So it seems as though the AI bubble is about to burst. The problem, though, is that right now the U.S. economy doesn't make any sense, right? So there's Michael Berry, who is very famous for predicting that in 2008, the subprime market, the CDO market, would collapse, and he took out billions of dollars in bets against this market, and he made a lot of money. And then he made a bet against AI because he was certain that none of the fundamentals made any sense in the AI industry. And then he suddenly announced that he was actually leaving the industry. And the reason why is, okay, the AI industry doesn't make any sense, but guess what? The entire American financial industry doesn't make any more sense anymore. Meaning that right now, the American financial industry, it's controlled by a few oligarchs. It's controlled by a minority of people who can dictate the market to their will. And so the average investor, market fundamentals no longer apply to what's happening. So yes, in theory, the AR market could collapse, but because there's so few players within the AI market, it's controlled by 7 companies. They can do whatever they want, and the American government has something called Operation Stargate, Project Stargate, and so Trump has promised hundreds of billions of dollars to invest in the AI infrastructure. So it's possible that this bubble keeps on going on and on, okay? So this means that right now the American financial industry lacks the capacity to self-correct. And so if the market collapses, it's probably gonna take the entire economy with it. And so that's a great problem facing the US financial industry. That's problem number one. Problem number two is over-financialization. When China announced that it was going to limit its exports of silver, and China controls about 60% of the silver market in the world, the price of silver went crazy. And the reason why is that in China, silver is used for manufacturing needs. So silver goes into AI, EV, batteries, all that. So China really needs silver. So silver is really, it's only paper silver. And a lot of these companies like JP Morgan, they're over leveraged 300 to 1. So every 1 ounce of silver that they have, they promise 300 on paper. And so it's a great bubble that's going to burst. Like what we saw in silver was almost like a small bank run. But it's not just silver, it's almost all these commodities where these commodities aren't used for manufacturing needs, they're used for speculation. And so the American financial industry is this great Ponzi scheme that's about to explode at any point. And the third great weakness of the U.S. economy, of course, is cryptocurrency, where Bitcoin, it's all just speculation. It brings actually no benefit to society. So you have all these major weaknesses in the American economy. But because, first of all, you have a few oligarchs who control all the resources. Second of all, the American government can print as much money as it wants. There's something called quantitative easing. And third of all, there's really no challenger to the US dollar. This bubble can sustain itself past 2026, but when it collapses, the entire society collapses. So silver goes into AI, it goes into EVs, batteries, because silver is the best metal conductor in the world, and there's no second. Copper is second, but it's far behind silver. So you need silver, and the world cannot produce enough silver, and this has been true for the past 5 years. And China and the United States are investing heavily into AI. So right now there's a major fight for access to silver, and this goes back again to Venezuela, where Latin America and South America actually are the world's greatest producers of silver. So whoever controls Latin America and South America basically has control over the AI future. So, the greatest strength and the greatest vulnerability of the United States is the US dollar, right? But the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of China is its reliance on exports. China is an export-oriented economy, and in order to feed its economy, it focuses on exports. And sometimes its export strategies are counterproductive and self-defeating. So for example, it dumps commodities onto the world market, which hurts the trade system. Okay, so China has also a lot of fundamental issues. Right now, the problem is that the United States is threatening to strangle, embargo, blockade China, right? So one thing that will flare up in 2026, it's already flaring up right now, is a rivalry between China and Japan, right? So Prime Minister Takeichi has said that she believes that Taiwan is part of Japan's strategic interest. And what does she mean by that? What she means by that is that if China were to get hold of Taiwan, Taiwan could blockade Japan from access to the Strait of Malacca, and therefore oil from the Middle East, which Japan is dependent on. And so Japan believes that if China were to invade Taiwan, then Japan would have to step in. Okay, so Taiwan is key. But the opposite is true, where if Taiwan were to side with Japan, then the first island chain could embargo China, can block China from trade. So I think in 2026, you'll see a lot more heated rhetoric between China and Japan. And the reason why is both economies are dependent on Middle East oil. And whoever can control the Strait of Malacca can basically strangle each other's economy. Europe is going to militarize against Russia, even though it is against the best interests of its people. Its people will be very upset with remilitarization. You're already seeing massive protests in Germany. A lot of this will be irrational, meaning like Europe has absolutely no path to victory in Ukraine, but Europe's going to send men to their deaths in Ukraine anyway, because Europe doesn't know what else to do, right? So what Europe is really saying is that we banked on Russia losing this war, and then we could impose an indemnity on Russia, and that would solve all our fiscal problems. Now that Russia is winning the war, we are facing economic collapse at home, and we don't really want to face that, so we're going to continue the war and hope for the best. So there's no strategy here. It's suicidal, it's irrational, but Europe is stuck where it is.